All right. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Theory and Theology. Here on this podcast, we talk about religion, spirituality, culture. I want to go into a bit of history. So what's been sparking this is, from time to time, I like to know about certain cultural events going on in areas that I go to, such as like downtown LA, the South Bay of LA, West LA, Hollywood area, San Bernardino, where I do some snowboarding up there, down in San Diego, sometimes Orange County, and I was coming across this history of an area that I'm often around, the South Bay area of Los Angeles. And so regarding the history of Rancho San Pedro, so Rancho San Pedro is basically the area that, when you look it up today, it's called Rancho Palos Verdes Peninsula, San Pedro, Torrance, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, those areas mostly. So names that come up surrounding those areas would be like Sepulveda, Dominguez. I mean, these are names like in Spanish, right? From Spain. And so when you start thinking about the history of these areas, a lot of times, in American history, we kind of start with, when did the Spanish come in? When did the, I don't know what other groups, but, mostly the Spanish, like in this kind of region in Southern California. But I like to take it back before that too, because there were definitely people living, in those areas far before the Spanish came anywhere near. And so I find that interesting. And also, it's also interesting how hard it is to find the history about that. So just starting at the part where where Rancho San Pedro was kind of starting to get developed. I'll talk a little bit about that, but then also definitely want to talk about the history before that. So if you look up the Rancho San Pedro area, it's a very beautiful area. The majority, I don't know about the majority, but a lot of it is coastal, very beautiful cliffs, ocean, nice beaches. I mean, it's a part of LA that's not like too many other parts of LA, because you're still relatively nearby, like kind of like the 91 freeways, 110 freeways, LAX. It's like south of LAX, north of Long Beach. You're not really nearby a freeway if you're all the way at the coast, but it's still a very beautiful area, kind of hidden. Like, most people don't, like, when they think about LA, they don't really think about that area. A lot of people, unless it's like Christmas shopping and stuff like that, or for like Japanese food, or just like a coastal area that's not so populated, like the beaches in like Palos Verdes, Torrance, Redondo Beach, San Pedro, they don't tend to be super packed like Venice Beach, Santa Monica, those types of beaches, like Dockweiler, definitely not as packed as like San Diego beaches, like Ocean Beach and Pacific Beach and Mission Beach and those areas. You can find parking easily in these other areas. Some of it's meter parking, some of it's residential parking if you're just like on the other side of the main streets. There's plenty of parking. It's it's LA, so it's still populated, but it's a very cool part of LA, because when you're there, you don't really have to be popping into other areas of LA. Like, you can just stay there and chill, and the weather's good. You're not too far inland, because inland is hotter. You're coastal. Very ideal type of place to want to be at in modern times. Even visiting or just hanging out, it's pretty chill compared to most parts of LA, and it's known a lot for like beaches, shopping, food, like restaurants, a whole lot of shopping centers, gigantic malls, a lot of like beach culture. But yeah, like I said, it's different. You're not paying $25 parking like at Venice Beach. You're not, you don't have airplanes coming over like at Dockweiler. Like, it's not like at beaches like in San Diego where you can drive and drive and drive and be looking for parking for like a really long time. Like, it's really nice area to be at. So when you look at the history of Rancho San Pedro, it includes all those kind of areas in the South Bay of LA, or sometimes they're called the beach cities area, and so they say that it was the first area where land grants in California were being given, and this was like in the late 1700s, and so there were definitely people living there before, and during that time, before like the 1700s, they were establishing missions. So if you're used to like the San Gabriel Valley area, there's a lot of missions out that way. There's a lot of missions south, like when you're going towards San Diego, and in San Diego there's a lot of missions. Like, Southern California has a lot of missions. You still see the terminology around, like the tortillas and stuff like that, but I mean, missions weren't necessarily like a positive part of history in California. They're definitely a part of the history for sure, but it's not necessarily like a glamorous, like, oh, these people were like, like basically people were forced onto missions, and it was a form of like control of the indigenous populations by the Spanish. And it's always interesting, in Southern California, a lot of the names, a lot of the street names, terminology, is like street names, city names, little area names. A lot of it is in Spanish, and it's a very interesting thing. And even a lot of Mexico, a lot of it is Spanish speaking. Like, Spanish has definitely, come a long distance up the west coast of North America, through, I think, probably almost the majority of California. It seems like, at least Southern California for sure, and the East. But yeah, so talking more about that, so it was said that, the history of Rancho San Pedro, so Rancho San Pedro was given to technically like a military veteran. It was his retirement deed of it was a lot of land that he was given. Like, all those cities I mentioned, it was a lot of area that is currently those cities. And if you look at like bordering areas, like the Dominguez, like when you see the name Dominguez, like Dominguez Hills and all that kind of stuff, there's a university over there, Cal State Dominguez Hills. It's in technically what's Carson, California right now. It borders Torrance. And Dominguez, like something popular over there at the university is the sports stadium. I don't know what it's called now. I know it used to be called, I don't remember what it used to be called either, but it's where the LA Galaxy's home is. Like after they left from the Rose Bowl, the LA Galaxy and the Chivas USA, that was their stadium at Cal State Dominguez Hills University, and in that Dominguez area. So you see those names a lot. And so that's kind of like, I don't need to go into like the whole history of the Spanish coming in and how all those areas were formed. I do want to talk some more about the stuff that happened before that, before Rancho San Pedro. And so, I'm going to post about that as well. And, these were basically lands, they were given land grants. And mind you, land grants or deeds to land or, whatever it's called, like retirement benefit of land. Like there were already people there. Like there were people already like living there. Like these weren't just like open, free places for people to just like, okay, we have this land, you can go live there. It's like, it's kind of weird when you think of it, and it's a little creepy. I mean, I have mixed feelings, because in modern day, it's like, we can't go back in time. We can't bring back people who were slaughtered. We can't bring back people from genocides, but that's definitely part of the history, hanging out in certain areas. Sometimes I do like to delve into like, why is all this stuff in Spanish, and like, what does it mean, and what's the history of it? Like, I spend so much time, or even in Torrance in general too. Like, one of the biggest populations of Japanese businesses and people living there, of Japanese descent, and the history of World War II and all kinds of other things like that. It's like, it's just like hidden history that we're never really taught. And, Los Angeles, San Diego, Orange County, these Southern California places are rich of so much history. San Bernardino as well. Just rich of so much history where we don't really get to learn about it. Like, we hear about, like, usually about from this point where I'm starting to talk, the history of Rancho San Pedro, or the history of whatever mission area was established, or the history of like the people who were the white people that settled the area after the Spanish people were there, and like all this kind of stuff. Like, we don't really get to hear about the people that were there before that. And it kind of piqued my interest because when I hear about local powwows going on, I like to kind of use that opportunity to kind of learn about, okay, it's a powwow and it's like this, tribe of people or like band of people, and, they're still living there, they're still, there. It's technically local, a drivable distance, less than 2 hours, it's like usually like an hour away if you're driving from like places in LA to San Bernardino. And, there's a history there, and, we're never really taught about it. We never really learn about it, but it's there. I mean, it's quiet, it's hidden in plain sight. That's kind of how I see it. It's like there's still people who are holding their traditions and cultural practices right in the middle of, September 2022, doing their thing, with their families, people traveling in, doing all these traditional things. And, it's easy to sit around LA and just be like, oh, like, who's like, are the Chargers playing, or the Rams playing, or the Dodgers playing, or the Angels playing down in Anaheim? Like, who's playing where? What's going on? Like, what concerts are coming through? Like, what's going on at the beach? How's the surf? Like, can we get a bonfire going? And it's like, meanwhile, there's all these like cultures around us that have been here before the rest of us even got here. However, we ended up getting, here. There was a lot that went on that wiped out entire populations of people that were living here, like nations of people, basically. Like, these areas were fully populated with a lot of culture and a lot of architecture, a lot of knowledge about fishing, farming, cultivating the earth, a lot of knowledge about how to sustain families and travel from place to place, and interact with other types of tribes and groups of people, and different kind of like agreements that people had, and different hierarchies and leaderships, and just all this kind of stuff that is a huge part, I feel, of our culture in the US that we just ignore. And I think we ignore it because we don't know about it, and we're not taught about it, and we're not told to think about it. I pretty much encourage anybody who is interested in different types of history of types of peoples, go ahead into YouTube or whatever social media you frequent and start searching around about stuff, and then see what starts getting recommended to you. I feel like that's one of the easiest ways to learn about stuff, because then stuff starts popping up in your recommendations, not just like whatever's trending and whatever is popular, or whatever sports are going on, or whatever events are going on. You can learn easily that way. And I think it's worth learning about, really. Like, not necessarily in a way to like shame anybody of like, oh, your culture got taken over, or your culture was the one that was like killing everybody. Like, I'm not saying it's not important and to ignore it, but also it's like not to create tension about it, but to learn about how we all got to where we're at. Like, there's a bigger backstory to a lot of our lives, even if some of us were kind of more in a passive role of things, and we just kind of showed up and like, all right, I'm just gonna live here. Maybe your ancestors weren't directly involved with some of these regions, but also it's like the history's deep and there's information there. I think it's important, and it's a bittersweet kind of fun. Like, if you really like learning, it's a fun way to learn about the history of places where you go, places where you do live, places where you have lived. Those are the easiest places to start, because you can recognize the names. You can recognize like, oh, like this name sticks better because like when I hear Rancho San Pedro, it's like I think of what we call San Pedro, which is an area by like Cabrillo, and there's like the beach is like a little secluded beach over there, a nice little city that's definitely got a lot of Spanish culture to it, with the architecture and everything. And it's in LA. You would never think, but it's just north of Long Beach, and it's coastal. It's not very well known. And it's a very cool spot. And it's again, like, not really to like make people feel bad about things on either side, on any side of things, but just to know and learn. And I think a lot of times we do not give ourselves the full experience of the history of our lives and the history of our own progress and success. None of us are able to get where we're at if we didn't have housing in certain areas, and schools in certain areas, and ability to get into those schools and get certain jobs and do certain stuff. But the way we do things now is not the way things were being done, even sometimes before the 1700s, like, and before 1492. Like, there's a documentary I was watching. Let me see if I can find the name. It was called like something like Before 1491, or 1491 and Before, or something like that. I don't know the name. I'm trying to look up the name now. 1491. Once I find it, I'm gonna end this and get back to the next part I want to talk about. But it's from the channel Timeline World History Documentaries. It's called The History of the Americas Before Columbus, 1491, complete series timeline. So it's about a 3-hour documentary broken up into about 3 or 4 45-minute sections. All is just one long video, and it's kind of like not too much a docudrama. It has like little docudrama portions. A lot of the anthropologists and people speaking are from the certain native groups that they're talking about the different topics, like when they start talking about maize or potatoes or dwellings or fishing or whatever. Like they talk to different types of professionals that are from certain tribes from the areas, and so that's pretty cool to see. And they have names like tribal names, like tribal groups that I've never even heard of before. We often hear about like the Sioux, the Cherokee, the Iroquois, like, and so on. Like there's a lot of groups that we hear about, and there's a lot that we just never really hear a thing about. This is kind of just a general episode, but some other things I do want to record on is like in San Bernardino, the San Marcos Reservation. Also like some of the genocide information about Turtle Island, and John Trudeau. Is it John Trudeau? I think it's Trudeau. Trudeau is the last name. In like Ottawa. And I think I've talked about this before, how I really like the YouTube channel called... Oh, it's not YouTube, sorry. It's isuma.tv, isuma.tv. So it's, I think it's mostly like indigenous groups from like Alaska and certain places in Canada. And it's basically just like their like media where they can upload their own like language, and there's some talks on there of some elderly people who are speaking about like their history of being in the mission, like in the reservation schools. And I mean, the only one I've ever been to is in Holbrook in Arizona, and I didn't even learn a whole lot about it, but the history that I learned, I was like, oh man, like it's an Adventist school, and the history that I learned about it, just about the area, like it's mostly Navajo, not only Navajo, but it's mostly Navajo. And Chinle is nearby. There's a Netflix movie, I think it's on YouTube as well, about Chinle. It's the documentary is about high school basketball players on the reservation in Chinle, and how like basketball is really popular there, and they get a lot of support from their community, and then they're going up against these other schools and like the prejudices they face and the barriers that they face coming from where they come from and everything, and just how they're able to perform and present themselves and everything. And so some of the kids that I met when I got to visit the Holbrook, I think it's called Holbrook Indian School or something like that. It's an Adventist school, and it's in Arizona. And yeah, I got to visit it, and they talk about the history of, kind of a more recent history, that there are a lot of people that are there, that are kids that are there, that are not mostly, I don't know the percentage, but they say it's not uncommon for some families who can't really afford to care for their kids to use it almost similar to like an orphanage. And the tuition's very low. I can't recall how much, but I want to say like $45 or something. It's very low tuition, and there's room, board, school, trades for the older kids, and I think the age ranges that we saw were like age ranges like 5 years old to like almost 18 or so. So if you can think about boarding at a school at 5 years old, I mean, I don't know of many boarding schools in the U.S. that are like that. Like, I've heard of ones in China that are like that, like where parents might send their kids to like live for a long period of time, but like at the school. But I've never heard of like American boarding schools. Usually you're in high school, you're not usually in, like, even European ones, you might be in like junior high, but usually when you're very young, you're not like running around at 5 years old like at a boarding school. Like, that's not, you're still like clinging to your parents and stuff. You're like, developmentally, attachment wise, you're still, too young to be doing that. But I mean, also for some people, it's like, what option do they have, really? Like, if they know their kid's gonna get taken care of. But that's just modern. I mean, those schools weren't formed for like modern, education like they are now. Like, they were formed to basically erase, the culture, and traumatize a lot of families, a lot of the kids, a lot of those kids who went to those schools during different time periods when the rules weren't really as humane, or were not, the rules were not humane, I'll put it that way. And the kids who went through those schools, they came out to be parents and having a lot of trauma from that. And that's kind of like the generations that I got to interact with, were a lot of the ones whose parents had gone through reservation schools, and other types of like history of trauma, and how their relatives and grandparents, parents, great-grandparents, how they were treated. I mean, when you think of it, it wasn't that long ago. It really was not that long ago that these things were happening. And, it's like, it was here in the U.S., in Canada. I mean, it's happened all over the world, honestly, and it's pretty gross, but I don't know if the rules are changing for the better necessarily. It's becoming more like, from what it sounds like, more so corporations are kind of creating systemic issues on top of all the other trauma that's not getting treated, and other history and problems and injustices and all this kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to focus just on like all the negative aspects of it, because people are resilient, and I like studying different groups of people to see kind of where they stand today and how they got to where they are now. There are still a lot of people surviving, even though unfortunately a lot of tons of people were lost. So I do kind of want to get into what I know about those types of stories from what I've been learning, but it's not like too comprehensive. I've been learning about this stuff here and there, off and on. Some of it's been review for me, some of it's been just learning new stuff for this weekend. But it's, I always tend to learn more than before, because even considering the amount of cultural related classes I've taken about different indigenous groups and things, I'm still lacking in knowledge and putting together the pieces. But yeah, I mean, it's easiest for me to start with the groups of people that, or the land areas that I'm familiar with nowadays, and the groups of people who kind of lived there before, because a lot of the names kind of come up. Like I mentioned before, in San Diego, there's like Teclode Canyon and Quaipe Peak. I mean, these are places that I would go all the time. And, those names are not Spanish and they're not English. So they're from other groups of people. And, even Siquan out there, east. And, San Diego has a lot of history of indigenous Americans, and we're also not taught any of that. It's just I just notice it. I just notice, and I look around and try to keep my eyes open, and I'm kind of like, okay, how am I in a city with like so much Japanese business and so many Caucasian people and everything's in Spanish, or how am I in a city where there's all these trail names that aren't any language that I've ever even heard before in my life, but everybody speaks English and Spanish, and then there's Vietnamese people around, and all these different groups of people around, and you're just kind of like, how'd they get here? What's going on? like why are there so many Vietnamese people in this pocket? Like I'll go to like McDonald's or a coffee shop or a boba shop, and there's all these like elderly Vietnamese people just kicking it with each other. During the Rona, I saw people bringing out lawn chairs, and they would sit in the little grass, the little grass island spaces in like the plaza parking lot, and they would just be chilling, have little tables out, playing cards, playing different games, talking to each other. When I would go to the sauna or the jacuzzi at the gym, it would always be me and all these like elderly Vietnamese men, and they'd just be like socializing. Like a lot of the elderly culture with Vietnamese culture seems to have a lot of social aspects where they hang out outside and they kind of just mingle amongst neighbors and members of their community. I mean, I don't really see that too much with other communities where they're just literally chilling in the middle of the day, like probably retired or something, and they're just like hanging out. Like, I go to the Mexican taco shop to grab a burger, or to grab a burrito or something, or I go, to fill my gas tank, and they're just kind of like chilling with each other. The same people all the time, like I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying, like, my eyes are open, I see it, and I'm like, there's all this stuff that goes on, and I'm just like zooming around, going about my life, and I do try to slow down and look and think about like, what is going on? Like, how did this start happening, or when did this start happening, or what brought these people here, what brought those people there. I remember when I was at Cal State LA, I think it's like, at least it was like 65%, Latino population university. I learned about it because of the film school. And then I went there for a psychology program and for grad school. And basically, I remember going to a speech, and it was about the Bracero program. And it talked about, people who came to the U.S. For that program, and how they were like poorly treated and lied to and basically treated like slave labor. And, I don't know how that was legal, but they were kind of tricked into it. And I was surprised at how many students talked about their own parents. Like, these were people my age who were like, yeah, my parents came here through that program. I had never heard about it up until then. And, there was a lot of Latino population. their parents, so just the generation before, came to that area and were settled living near downtown when they had those people as kids who were students that were about my age range. And it was hundreds of people who had parents who came here. And that's just one school. Like, I don't even know, how big these programs were, but I mean, it was one of those political incentive type of programs. But, I'm not even talking about all that right now. Like, there's so much to talk about with these types of topics where it's like, even Latino culture in general, culture in Mexico in general, a lot of those were indigenous people that, yes, now they speak Spanish because of Spain coming in and doing what they did, and, but they were something else before, and they were just kind of grouped into, oh, they're Mexicans now. But it's kind of like they had other distinct indigenous groups too. And just to think, okay, they went from those indigenous groups to Mexicans to, some people going to the Bracero program and now living in downtown LA. It's like, downtown LA has a large Latino population. East LA in general. Like, when I say downtown, I kind of mean East LA. It's not really the same thing necessarily, because not all of East LA is downtown, but I kind of just refer to it as downtown, I guess. But yeah, those are just things to look into. And like, kind of even like the Dodger Stadium, like the group of people who live there, the Latino population that lived where the Dodger Stadium is now. It's like stuff like that. It's like there was like a whole, culture of people who lived there before they were kicked out and the stadium was built. It's just pretty fascinating that within a couple generations, the history is like almost, it's not fully invisible, but it's really not promoted or taught or preserved in a way that's like acknowledged publicly on a regular basis. And when I saw Juneteenth, for the second year being celebrated in LA and all over the place, but specifically in LA, I was there for both years, the first 2 years that it was ever really celebrated. And it's a very interesting time period. And it's just like if black people can get Juneteenth to be like something that's recognized, and I don't really know the role of black people, how they played a role in that. I don't know if it was black people or if it was just politicians in general who were just like, we're just going to do this. I think that there's hope for a lot of different nations to have a recognition of, their part of their history in society in this country too. And, at least that way we kind of start learning when it's part of like the mainstream, like, okay, I get a day off, at least I have some time to learn a little bit. Like, I get Cesar Chavez Day off at where I work, and MLK Day, and now Juneteenth, and there's different types of cultural parts of our history that are kind of linked to all these holidays, and we're living right in the middle of history, and a lot of times we don't really learn about it. But I do think it is, hopeful when there's actually like holidays and commemoration days, where it's like, okay, like Dia de los Muertos is coming up in LA. That's a pretty big celebration, and different things like that, where it's like, okay, it's in part of the, you see it in the newspapers, or like, you see flyers around for stuff, and then you kind of start knowing about it and learning a little bit about it, even if it's just that time of the year. I do think it's important, because I think one thing that Americans, a lot of us, kind of struggle with, is a lot of us don't really have a connection to our heritage, a connection to, the heritage of our own, like, ancestors. But I think too, it's also important to have a connection to the heritage that's around us, even if it's not biologically ours, just to know, like, how we got here, because at least it links us to some kind of history, and we can kind of always, try to become better, as history kind of evolves and, becomes, the more that we become like in the current moment, like we do really tend to kind of learn like more and gain, like there is potential to kind of gain more, what do you call it? Education, but that's not necessarily what I was gonna say. Like, kind of gain more, kind of strengths. So, for example, I was talking to my mom not that long ago, like this morning, like when I got back from the gym around, just like maybe around noon, maybe just before noon, I don't know. But, I was just kind of making comments about, like, how did we used to watch certain cartoons, like, I can't remember which one we were saying was kind of like racist or racially charged. There was one that we were saying before, but I think we were talking about, like, oh yeah, she was talking about Pepe Le Pew, because she said there was a skunk outside, and like I was kind of asking, like, well, what was the cat's name in that Pepe Le Pew cartoon? And I was like, that's kind of like prejudice against like French people when you think of it, like the idea of like perfumes and the French accent and the stink, and just kind of like how it was like obnoxious and smothering and nobody really wanted him around. Like, really? Like, if somebody made a cartoon like that today, they'd be like really not praised for that. And then I started talking about Speedy Gonzales, and there was a time in my life when that cartoon started to bother me, because I was just like, wait, like they're insinuating a lot of things, and I kind of started to notice, like the Speedy Gonzales and the Slow Rodriguez characters, where Slow Rodriguez is almost always drunk, and like it's like, really, like these kind of cartoons are like, I remember watching this kind of stuff, and we'd laugh and stuff. And I do remember even like some other cartoons that had like characters with blackface and like slaves and indentured servant types of people with like their big lips and their dark black skin, and like their hair with braids like sticking out all over the place, like near the Mickey Mouse type of era. And it's like, wow, like you think about those kind of cartoons and stuff, and you're like, or even like Western movies and stuff like that, like you think about some stuff like that, and you're like, people would not really be too quick to purchase those types of things nowadays, and not look at it and frown about some parts of it and be like, this is just not okay. Like there was that Riverside, I think I saw it was about 10 months ago. There was this Riverside teacher, I think she was like a middle school teacher, teaching about geometry, how they have like SOH CAH TOA, and she was like, she made this like construction paper headdress that looked like it was a Native American headdress with like paper feathers of different colors. Like she put some effort into that headdress and was dancing around the room looking like she had like 2 tomahawks in her hands, like chanting SOH CAH TOA, SOH CAH TOA. There's a point where she's like dancing around and on the table and on the her front desk, and just kind of making a fool of herself. And this is in a math class. Like it was on an NBC News clip where they were saying too, they're like, this isn't even a sociology class or a history class, like, and she put some effort into making that headdress. Like she thought it through a little bit, that she's like, oh, like I'm gonna teach my class about this thing by making it like sound like some Native American language chant or something. And I was just like, what the hell? And one of the students in the class had filmed that and recorded it during class, because of course, thank God for smartphones. He had a smartphone and he was recording it, and his main comment was, at least it was him coming across it in that class and not someone who would go out after school and harm themselves or something like that. Like that was his comment. And I'm thinking, for a kid to say that as a comment is a very strong comment. It's like, those kind of, think about all the people who look up to their teachers. If you're in a class where you're a minority and there's a teacher that's literally making fun of your culture, and you can't really see the facial expressions of the kids in the class, but you can kind of see how they're a little bit like, nobody's really laughing, nobody's really paying like very close. Like it seemed like they were like, how there's that fight, flight, or freeze? It seemed like that freeze, like discomfort, awkward. That's the impression I got, was like, they're like, this is my teacher, she's doing this weird thing, she's like chanting around and like acting like a fool, and they said she was on a leave of absence or something now, and like at least then, and they think it's going to open discussion for talking about indigenous peoples and stuff. And that was Riverside. Like I was mentioning, I was just watching a powwow in San Bernardino. It's like right there. And I'm like, I mean, I know this kind of stuff happens, but I'm just thinking too, I'm like, what part in somebody's mind makes them think, I'm going to create a math lesson that's basically, putting down a whole other culture of people, and, a math lesson putting down a whole culture of people, and, just the fact that she put effort. Like there was a picture in the background, I don't know what it was, if it was like an overhead projector or like a projector. I don't think they use overheads anymore, but like a projector on a whiteboard with a picture of a teepee and like like some type of indigenous looking person, like drawn, like stick figure type drawn on the board. And it's like, there was some thought that went into this. I don't know what kind of thought, but not a good thought. Some kind of ignorant thought that went into creating this lesson, where she was trying to drill into the kids' heads this SOH CAH TOA with like, the sides and angles of like shapes and geometry and stuff. I think it comes from like triangles, right? Oh no, it's from trigonometry. Well, and geometry. You use it in geometry too. But like, yeah, for sine, cosine, and tangent. But yeah, anyways, yeah, but I've never heard, I mean, when I was in school, we just memorized SOH CAH TOA. We didn't have to have like a chant in the background and like thinking about some like indigenous culture or something. Like it's not that hard to remember, you know, like she didn't have to do all that. She didn't have to make weird visuals of another culture that she didn't even know what she was talking about. Like, it's not like she even was like accurately saying like, oh, in some culture these words actually mean this thing in this culture or that culture. Like, there was no educated information coming from her chanting and dancing and headdress and the little picture on the board and stuff. Like, it was just mocking, basically. And I don't think she considered it. I just don't think she thought it through. But I'm like, how can you do that, you know? And to have it on a recording too, where it's like, what the heck? You know, like, and these are kids, they're not like college students either. They're like younger, they're minors, you know, they're younger than 18 years old. They're probably like between like 13 and 16 years old. I don't know the exact age range, but they were young. And I'm like, it seemed to me by the silence in that room that they were weirded out by it too. I can't tell people what to watch, but if you want to see something cringy as hell, that's fucking cringy, guys. But I mean, I was pretty shocked by it. You know, and I didn't do much to search for this stuff. I was just searching for like just updated things, and you know, these are just the things I'm coming across. You know, and the last one I'll talk about is the I kind of briefly touched on it about that Ottawa conference, or you know, CBC news reporter who was talking down to the indigenous people of Turtle Island, and how they were talking about like a genocide there, and how Trudeau was contributing to that or something along those lines. And she was kind of almost making it like sound like, oh, it's not really a big deal. And they tried to like shut her from talking. They asked her to leave. They kind of tried to tell her just to stop, like, stop making your comments, stop being rude, you're being so disrespectful to our culture, and you know, you're visible, you have privilege. And they started referring to her as like white lady, and you know, like they're like, you are a guest here, you know, you are our guest, you know, and you don't even know how to talk to us. And it was this whole thing, you know, rightfully so. I think rightfully so. They wanted to be heard, and she was trying to over bully them with her privilege and her, you know, newscaster privilege, being a white woman. And then I guess a white guy tries to rephrase that same lady's question, and they were like, you know, look how quickly, like, you know, you have support even when you're asking like ignorant things and like being disrespectful. I mean, and there were those two women who were up there just like telling her to stop, and she kept talking. You could hear her in the background, like in the seats. These two ladies were on the stage. There was a third woman up there too, but these two ladies came up on the stage and were like, no, like, you need to stop, you know. And she wouldn't even stop. She just kept on talking. They asked her to leave. They practically kicked her out, told her to stop talking, told her that she was done. She just kept on talking. And I'm just like, what? like, I don't know. Myself being a minority, I can't even, like, imagine being a news reporter, being in a room of, you know, indigenous groups of people, asking them a very rude question, I couldn't imagine being in that newscaster's place, but I couldn't imagine me doing it in the first place. And even if I had asked a rude question, I can't imagine myself not being like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be disrespectful, I didn't know, I wasn't being culturally sensitive. Like, I'm learning and I still just don't know like what's disrespectful, and I wasn't considering that I was being disrespectful. I would at least apologize, at the very least. Even if I couldn't explain myself, I would have shut my mouth and apologized. She didn't even say sorry. She kept on trying to talk and kept on trying to like talk about her ideas. And it's like, nobody wants to hear your ideas. Like, nobody wants to hear that. You know, they're here trying to get help for their people that are being killed and going missing, and, you know, young women going missing and all kinds of things like that, in their area at Turtle Island. And she just doesn't even seem to care about the fact that there's tragedies currently going on that aren't being addressed by their leaders. And she just wants to, you know, talk about a very one-sided perspective of the government and managers, or mayors and politicians in those areas, and like, why aren't people praising them? And it's like, dude, like did you even read about what's going on? Did you even learn about what was going on before you even came into that press conference? Like, I don't know. Like, I haven't even spent a lot of time on this, guys. Like, this is like a few minutes, you know, like, I watched a powwow last night for like a couple hours. Started learning some of the certain stuff, looking up some of the singing groups, kind of reviewing some powwow information and learning about the San Marcos Reservation in San Bernardino, and then started reviewing other areas in LA County that I know about, and the indigenous groups there, and in San Diego. And then came across a couple, like this NBC and the CBC kind of info in that documentary. That's basically all I've come across within, mostly today. Some of it was last night, but I was like, I'm pretty pumped up about it. So once I get studying on something, even if it's brief, you guys know me, even if it's brief, I'd rather put out a little bit of information on the little that I can gather and the little that I can learn in like a few hours. I feel like if I'm sitting around the house, this is what I like to do. I wasn't in the mood to play video games. I wasn't in the mood to do anything. I kind of wanted to use my brain a little bit and just learn some cultural information. And yeah, I found it pretty surprising, the stuff I'm coming across and how hard it is to research stuff. Like, it's not easy to find stuff that I'm looking for. Like, I'm Googling stuff, I'm re-Googling stuff, I'm finding different titles to Google, different names to Google, different types of stuff to look up. To me, that is the whole fascinating process of how challenging it is to find information that is right there. You know, it's right there. Like, we built cities on top of it, you know, like, we're living in the middle of it, and, you know, how come I can't find information on it? You know, so it frustrates me. Can you tell? Can you tell, guys? I'm a little frustrated. But nonetheless, I'm enjoying my time, you know, searching for stuff. And I hope this is helpful for people. I really would encourage people, if it's of interest to you. I mean, it is a big, you know, let's learn about all the cultures. You know, it's a big task to try to take on, but I feel like when you take on cultural aspects, like when you take on learning about cultural details about where you're from or where you go, that's kind of the easiest place to start, because it's like very much related to stuff that you're around on a regular basis. It's a little bit easier to kind of try to like think about what things may have looked like in the past or whatever. And I think it's important. I really do think it's important. I find it valuable. Thanks for listening.